Hi, welcome back to Boot Bentz, the only show dedicated to finding Cliff Bentz a new line of work. A few weeks ago, Cliff Bentz created and mailed out his guide to the Working Families Tax Cut Act, which was, is, and ever shall be House Resolution 1, the one big beautiful bill. I've thus far taken on his assertions about who really benefits from the bill's tax cuts, how the bill will impact American agriculture, Social Security, tips, overtime pay, and U.S.-made car purchases. With the third item on the list inside, Bentz diverts his focus from taxes to tell us about what he calls forestry and wildfire mitigation. He expounds that the legislation increases timber harvesting on federal lands, a measure intended to create jobs and reduce the risk of wildfires. Let's go over what the bill prescribes for timber harvesting. The U.S. Forest Service is now responsible for increasing the volume of timber harvested on the land it manages by 250 million board feet and 20 million board feet annually from the land administered to by the Bureau of Land Management. The bill mandates that these agencies sell the specified amount of timber in at least 40 contracts for national forest land and 5 for the BLM, contracts that must span at least 20 years. Even logging businesses have pointed out that this will harm competition and, by extension, prices. Now, keep in mind, the Forest Service sold 2.9 billion board feet of timber in 2024. The mandated increase in this bill would be 8.7% if the mandate is carried out as planned. The Forest Service could see as much as 37.2 billion board feet of timber by 2034, a 75% increase. If that sounds like a lot, that's because it is. And while Oregon's own sawmills are currently working at 73% capacity and increased logging inherently means more employment, it's not clear if the infrastructure or the workforce or the market exists to make the bill's logging dreams come true. In Oregon, the Bureau of Land Management already grows more trees than are being harvested. One might argue that this kind of good-paying job that Americans need, and I would hope that people also recognize that OSHA has ranked logging as the most dangerous job in America. Roughly 1 out of every 1,000 loggers will die from work-related accidents. It has an exceptionally high rate of injury. It is 30 times more dangerous than the average American occupation. This is not to discount the danger of being a firefighter, especially in remote and forested locations. The Forest Service employs 11,000 firefighters annually. Some estimates place the national annual cost of fighting wildfires at $3 billion. A great deal of that funding has come from congressional appropriations. In addition, the Department of Interior recently announced a token $20 million to help strengthen local wildfire response. This came on the heels of the regime's executive order empowering common sense wildfire prevention and response. This executive order essentially boosts the urgency with which the federal government wants to increase logging. Beyond that, it seeks to consolidate wildfire programs and coordinate everything through the Department of the Interior. It places more of the burden on local and state governments to fight fires on public land. It prescribes the use of AI to help fight fires and targets regulations that may impede logging, and it blames the regime's perceived political foes as the direct cause of some fires. There's a great deal of scientific research that proves logging does not necessarily reduce the risk of forest fires. In fact, there is ample evidence to suggest that it can increase the risk of or severity of forest fires. And while forest fires have existed for as long as forests have, 2 studies in 2008 and 2016 found that protected, unlogged forests do not burn more frequently than developed forest areas. 60% of jurisdiction-crossing forest fires originated on private property, with 28% on national forest land, according to a 2022 Oregon State University study that included 11 states and 141 million acres. Logging creates plenty of hazards, not the least of which is timber slag, or the debris left over from logging operations. Sawdust, wood chips, pine needles, twigs, and more dry materials left over create immense fuel for fire. 3 studies from 2014, 2018, and 2022 suggest that the increased exposure of logged forest to sun and wind will dry out the remaining underbrush, creating more fuel. The trees that loggers don't want and leave behind can create a homogenized forested area that increases susceptibility to fire, and logging in and of itself creates more carbon pollution than wildfires do. The Blue Mountain Diversity Project has compiled this research and helpfully points out that the majority of modern forest fires are caused by human activity. The problem is not just that logging is being equated to wildfire mitigation. The problem is also that the federal government has taken a broadsword to the agencies that are most active in wildfire prevention and fighting. In early 2025, the Department of the Interior cut 3,400 workers. By July, some 4,500 firefighter roles were still vacant. The Bureau of Land Management also works to prevent and fight forest fires. They lost 800 workers in early 2025. And the National Park Service, which educates and works to prevent forest fires, cut 1,000 workers, but newer estimates place that number at 4,000. Regional Forest Service hubs, more capable of coordinating activity across multiple state and local jurisdictions, will be replaced with small state offices consisting of less than 10 people, overseen by a new Forest Service headquarters in Salt Lake City, Utah. Quick side note, the drying of the Salt Lake is exposing that city to a toxic dust of lead, lithium, and arsenic that will likely make the entire area uninhabitable within the next decade. But I digress. The bill even creates problems for itself. With a reduction in Forest Service workers, there will be fewer employees to assist H.R. 1 with its goal of selling off huge amounts of timber. The rescission of $267 million from the Park Service also impacted forestry, conservation, and environmental programs, including funding for a program that literally followed the president's own notion of combing the forest floor. So why is Bentz proud of this? I don't think it's because he received $8,500 from Weyerhaeuser's Political Action Committee this last election cycle versus the $2,400 from the cycle before. I don't think it's because the president himself purchased corporate bonds in Weyerhaeuser valued somewhere between $1 and $5 million. And it's not because there is a critical unmet demand for lumber. I think this push comes from an effort to save face. As writer Rich Friedman muses, it could be the regime's way of masking the consequences of the increased cost of home building as a result of the extreme and illegal tariffs imposed on Canadian timber. If I were Cliff Bentz, I would be more proud that I worked across the aisle to reauthorize the Secure Rural Schools Act, which helps offset the lost revenue from reduced logging that started in the 1990s. Oregon has received $4 billion of this funding over the last 24 years. 165 of our state's 197 school districts receive SRS funding. And American rural schools educate 20% of all public school students. According to the National Education Association, 9.5 million children. This critical funding is used for roads as well. But in order to celebrate that victory for vulnerable communities, Bentz would have to admit that a big dollop of socialism was required to help his constituents. A scrappy effort of bicameral bipartisanship made the difference as to whether his constituents suffered or thrived. Cliff Bentz, Ron Wyden, and Jeff Merkley worked to save schools from closing. Schools that had been holding on for 2 years without their funding by a thread. Many other schools didn't make it. So why won't Bentz tout the passage of the SRS? Because in many ways it confirms the overarching issue of increased logging, the extraction of value from local communities with little or no benefit to them. Local revenue from timber sales has historically been lower than the SRS funding, and local taxes can't be levied on federal land. Logging operations can devastate a community's ability to attract tourism dollars or other forms of investment, and they certainly don't benefit to the degree that timber operations or the federal government does. In short, the SRS is the only thing that will keep these small communities alive, even with increased logging. Economic benefits downwind of logging must be measured against the externalized costs of pollution and environmental degradation. And of course, last but not least, forests pull carbon from the air. Reducing on a massive scale means reducing the planet's ability to endure climate change, and it reduces our access to clean air. Increased logging equals increased forest fires, especially where no roads have yet been made. And it's coming. Logging of mature and old-growth trees, logging of habitats belonging to endangered species, logging near streams or other bodies of water critical to all surrounding life. Fiery destruction is coming, and Cliff Bentz won't say or do anything to stop it.